Welcome to Difficult Conversation Africa broadcast. I present to you the host, Yinka Olaito.
Welcome to Difficult Conversation Podcast Africa. On today's episode, we are looking at a very major topic that is transforming growth and responsibility. And it has to do with ESG, that is regularly referred to as environment, social, and governance. Across the globe, ESG has shifted from a buzzword to a powerful framework for how businesses and investors and government behave. But what does this mean for Africa? For a continent grappling with immense opportunities and complex challenges, ESG could be more than just a compliance checklist. It could be a catalyst for inclusive, sustainable development. Africa Developmental Agenda, from the African Union Agenda 2063 to Sustainable Development Goal, called for transformative challenge, but that transformation won't happen unless we align growth with environment protection and inclusion among several other governance issues. On one hand, African Development Agenda, including the African Union Agenda 2063 and UN Sustainable Development Goals, demand environmentally responsible policy, inclusive and social practices, and transparent governance. On other hand, many African countries grapple with structural issues such as limited infrastructure, informal economy, and governance gap. This episode today, that is titled Linking ESG to African Development Agenda, and my guest is Mrs. Olajobi Makinwa. My guest is a senior corporate governance compliance executive, international development specialist, and adjunct professor, as well as former senior advisor at United Nations Global Compact, among many posts she had held. Welcome, Mrs. Olajobi Makinwa, to the program.
Thank you very much indeed for having me. Thank you.
So, based on your experience, we feel that just a week after UNGA, and what we are going to be discussing is also good to draw conclusions from some of the thoughts that were shared by African leaders post UNGA. So my first question to you, Ma, is when we set the scene, what does ESG really mean in practice for African development context, and how is it different from traditional CSR, corporate social responsibility?
Yeah, thank you. Let's actually look at how ESG started, environmental, social, and governance. It had its roots in the 1970s with the emergence of what we call the socially responsible investing. That one aimed to align investment with ethical values. That is important for investors to invest, and it's also important for them to make profit, but they must be based on ethical values. ESG, environmental, social, and governance, was officially coined in 2004 by the United Nations Global Compact. In this report, there was a report that was prepared by the UN Global Compact under the Principle for Responsible Investing, an initiative of the UN Global Compact. The report was titled Who Cares Wins. And the effort that time, it encouraged companies and investors to think about more than just financial returns. That is, companies and investors, before you invest your money in a company, it's better for you to think much more than the financial returns you are going to get from it. You need to consider the impact of that company, the impact of that business on people and the planet. So that in investment decisions, investors must take into account environmental, social, and governance performance of a company, in addition to the financial returns. Before ESG, many companies had practiced what we called, you mentioned corporate social responsibility, or CSR. CSR is about charity, it's about donations, it's about community projects. It didn't go to the operations of the company. And that's what ESG is saying. You need to look at the operations of the company, how it's taken into account, the protection of the environment, the issues of natural resources, the issues of how the company treats its staff, how does it treat its suppliers, that is the S. And in terms of governance, how the company takes into account transparency, anti-corruption, the issue of how the board works, are there women on the company's board, and all that. Yes, exactly. Whereas CSR is about, okay, yes, so I'll donate to you. I'll build a school, I'll build a community hall, I'll donate money, I'll do this, which is, it doesn't come into the operations of the company, and it's not embedded in the operations and strategy of the company. The ESG, on the other hand, says your operations, your strategy, your practices, everything must incorporate environmental, social, and governance issues. Whereas CSR is mostly about companies wanting to do PR, okay. You said that we are making money, we're making money, okay. We are not looking after the poor people. You take, as Yoruba say, you take, and just leave me alone, most of them is to improve their company's image. Didn't always change how the company operates. So, and it's always, CSR is mostly about short term, because it's not embedded into the operations of the company. It's not embedded into the strategy of the company. Whereas ESG is embedded into the operations of the company. ESG also, investors will look at two companies, for example. Maybe company A, company B, they're producing the same products. So an investor, if I'm an investor, I want to see how that company, the two companies operate ESG. So I look at their report, their sustainability report. How is this one treating the environment? How is this one treating its staff? How is this one, in terms of governance issues? How does it treat its suppliers? I look at it. So I'll be able to make my own decision based on the report of the two companies. So that is why.
So you are saying that ESG is much more deeper than just charity, and it's a long-term thing than just a one-off thing that CSR often emphasize.
Exactly. ESG is totally different. It's about embedding responsibility into the way that businesses are run. So it will link the company's social impact directly with profit, how it's, with its risk management and long-term survival. It's about long-term survival, whereas CSR mostly, in most cases, is about short-termism. It's about short-term. It's not looking at the long-term survival of the company. And that's what investors will look at. Is it about the long-term survival? Because if, for example, it's about climate change, how is the company embedding climate change issues into its operations? How is it doing that? If it doesn't do that and the other company does that, I, as an investor, will see that this is a company that is investing for the, that is working for the long term, So that is how it is different. Mostly CSR is mostly short term, whereas ESG is different. It's most of it's about how a company looks at its risks, how it manages its risks, how it manages its profit, and how it produces a long-term value, long-term survival, for its share. For its stake.
I know that you used to work with United Global Compact. Maybe just a quick thought. What informed ESG? What were the foundational issues before the introduction of that principle?
Okay, fantastic. It's a long story, but let me just, there were, in the 1990s, we had a number of corporate scandals. For example, the Nike, the sweatshops in Asia. And there was a lot of uproar, and it dented the image of Nike. How can you, a big company like that, investing where people's human rights are not respected? And you can hear also a few years ago where there was a fire incident in one of the countries in Asia where a big company, most of these big companies, multinationals in the fashion industry were making clothes, and the people were in a room. They were locked, in that room. When there was fire, they couldn't escape. And yet you are on the Fifth Avenue in New York, making so much money, and your suppliers are treating people without human rights. So, and it was then that there was a lot of uproar against companies that, and then what was the response of many of these companies? It was CSR. And people also, there was a lot of uproar that no, it has to go beyond just, first level things that you're doing. You need to take this into operations to make sure that your suppliers, the same, if you're having policies on human rights, you're having policies on your governance issues, you're having policies on the environment, and you are having your policies and practices on ESG, on these issues, your suppliers also, you are responsible for the work of your suppliers. So you need to look at your supply chain, you need to look at your value chain. So it was then that investors now said, well, as an investor, I don't want to vote with my money for a company that doesn't take into account all these issues, embedding it into their operations, embedding it into their business strategies, making it part and parcel of the company. I'd rather invest in a company that takes care of the planet, that takes care of the people, and it takes care of prosperity. It's not that companies should not make money. At the end of the day, there has to be a return on investment. If a company goes down, for example, it will have an effect on the country. It will have an effect on the services that the company is producing. It will have an effect on the people that are working for the company. So everyone, we are all interested for the company to continue to be a going concern. But how the company is not only what the company makes, but how it makes its money is very important. Do you make your money by violating the environment? Do you make your money by destroying biodiversity? Do you make your money just based on corruption and not being transparent? That sort of company will not last. And we know of companies like that. Enron, years ago, Arthur Andersen was one of the big four.
Yes.
You don't hear about them. Why? Because they made, the issues of governance, they did not address it. So that's why the issue of ESG came into being. That, as a company, you need to take into account environmental, social, and governance issues. I as an investor, I want to see it, and it also requires that. Let me also say here that ESG, when it started, was targeted at investors in terms of how they make investment decisions. How they make the investment decisions. So even me, you can see young people, they want to put their money in a company that is taking into account environmental issues, not just talking about it. Exactly. So that is it. Whereas CSR is mostly charity driven, ESG is system driven, embedding environmental, social, and governance standards into how it functions, into its operations, deep down at every level of the company. That is taken into account.
Now let's bring it home. I know you're an African, a senior person, a corporate governance person, and you have worked with different developmental agencies, including UN. Now, how do African key development blueprints, such as Agendas 2063 and SDG, align with ESG principle, opportunities and challenges?
Okay, thank you so much for that. Let me say that for Africa, ESG is not a Western export at all. It's a development. It's a development. Yes, it was developed in the West, but the way we do business in Africa before, we take into account all these issues. It's ESG is a development governance tool and it connects sustainability to competitiveness. It moves from doing good to governing well. So how do Agenda 2063 and SDGs align with ESG? Let me say here that both frameworks, they already embody ESG pillars. ESG pillars about people, that's the social, the planet, that's the environmental, prosperity and peace, that's the governance. So it's about not leaving anybody behind, for example, on the SDGs. And Agenda 2063 about the Africa that we want. Africa with its people and all that. That is ESG. ESG just provides the measurement and accountability language for Agenda 2063 implementation. Because when you look at ESG, there has to be a way of measuring. If a company says that I take into account climate change, how and with climate change, there are different ways of reporting for a company. Because, they always say that reporting drives implementation. So if you say that you are doing ESG, there has to be a report, which investors will look at to be able to determine whether they want to invest in you or not. So for you to be able to produce a report, there has to be metrics, and that's why you have so many reporting organizations that are helping to develop metrics that companies will use to report. So ESG now provides the metrics for the measurement of the implementation of Agenda 2063. Yeah.
Well, maybe just one sentence or two on these. Are we sure that Africans, leadership, and everyone is actually paying attention to this in the way we operate?
Well, I believe so. ESG is making its way inroads in Africa. I mean, I think it was in 1994 that the South African government adopted the the King's report. The issue of corporate governance that they started. Actually, I think it was 1994. The issue of corporate governance. And then later it has been developing since then. There are so many reports. Let me not mention this. I don't want to confuse people. But if you look at Nigeria also, Nigeria has done well also with the issue of the green bond. I think it was in 2021 or something like that. Yes. So, yes, indeed. So government are taking this into action. But let me say here that ESG itself is a voluntary action of companies.
So it's not mandatory.
It's not mandatory. However, it's becoming mandatory in places like Europe, where they now have laws, because when it's voluntary, but the fact that it is voluntary does not mean that companies are not doing the right thing, because you see, investors will look at this before they make their investment decision. So if you are not a company that does this, how do you want to attract investment? That is it. And ESG, for example, African government, like I said, they are taking this into account. And in many countries now, they're working on this, developing different platforms. Because we know that ESG will give African governments and companies also a seat at the global capital table to be able to unlock sustainable finance and green bonds. Yeah,
So what do you think? What do you think are the opportunities for African nations and businesses in adopting ESG framework? I'm sure that we're already talking around it, but to be specific, what are the opportunities?
Like I said, to give a company, for example, a seat at the global capital table, even governments. Because investors will now, if an investor is aware that you have your ESG report, they will be able to look at your report and see what you're doing. They would rather invest in you than in a company that is not, working on ESG. So it will unlock sustainable finance and green bonds. Africa can also leapfrog, the outdated models by embedding sustainability early in industrialization. We don't need to go back to some of the mistakes that have been made in the West before, but then we can leapfrog as we industrialize by using new models, And there's also the huge potential in sectors like renewable energy, agribusiness, blue economy, and social infrastructure to embed ESG. So there's so many opportunities. And at the end of the day, it's about long-term investment, investment that is concrete, investment that is not about short-term. Yes. And of course, there are challenges.
So you already mentioned that for Africa now, ESG is voluntary. For me, it's a lot of concern. What are the will you look at this as one of the unique challenges or barriers to African government and organization in implementing ESG?
Well, I don't see, of course, there are challenges because if you look at the reporting frameworks that we have today when it comes to ESG, they're mostly geared towards big companies and companies from the West. But companies are not, many of them, they've embraced ESG. Even with the geopolitics, with what is happening in the world today, the UN Global Compact released its own central report during the UN General Assembly. And you can see that many of the companies CEOs said, look, despite the geopolitics, despite the issues, what is happening all over the world today, we are still committed to sustainability. So companies are, they are still committed because at the end of the day, if you are a company, if corruption is part of your strategy of making your money, there is no way that you will last. It will, at the end of the day, and investors who do not want to invest in a company that is corrupt. So they look at it. So you want to make sure that you do the right things. If you are a company that you don't treat your staff well, you see that there are so many awards nowadays, the company to work for. The company to work for. Yeah, that is it. So companies also want to, they are competing to be the company to work for. A few years ago, somebody said, who wants to work for a crook? When a company is involved in corruption and there's a scandal, you find that most of the best staff, they leave the company, they run away. So that is it. So
it can also be an image issue. The way you are pushing, it can also be an image issue.
Not really an image issue because you see, well, there are some companies that might do it for PR, but then people will look through at the end of the day, and we have the organized civil society organizations that can look at the report and say, this is nothing, And companies don't want that, especially reputable companies. You don't want a report that people will say, oh, this is just greenwashing. You don't want that,
So how can ESG attract or shape foreign direct investment into Africa? Now we have identified that it's quite a lot of goodies when you practice the principle of ESG. So my question is, how can ESG attract or shape foreign direct investment to Africa?
Yeah, let me say here also, we have so many opportunities, but ESG also has its own challenges, especially when you ask companies to start reporting. There's so many reporting frameworks, and the APRA, Africa Peer Review Mechanism, based in Africa, they released a publication, I think last year, on Africa corporate governance. It's about corporate governance in Africa, that in terms of reporting, in terms of corporate governance in Africa, we need to look at the African context. We need to look at the fact that many of our companies are small and medium enterprises. So I will encourage people to go and read that report, which says that let's not just import what is happening abroad. Let's bring it back home in terms of looking at the types of companies we have, in terms of looking at our own context. So it's important for us to look at our own ecosystem. Now, about foreign ESG and foreign direct investment, investors, like I said, they increasingly assess ESG risk before they deploy their capital. You have to look at the risk of that company. What are the risks? And how is the company taking care of the risks before they actually bring their capital, before they deploy their capital? So what I'm saying therefore is that it's important for companies to embrace and embed ESG so that they can attract patient, responsible investors. An investor that is responsible will not invest in a company that is not taking into account ESG.
Let's look at localizing talk context. I'm sure you were trying to talk around that area. When we talk about principle, there is part of contextualizing principles, benchmarking it to how it fits your own environment, and not just taking everything and begin to run with it. How should ESG be contextualized to reflect African reality, such as informal economy, infrastructural gaps, and local cultural values?
Yeah, I mean, we have to be, it's important. Like I said, if you look at the APRM that developed the African Principles and Guidelines on Corporate Governance, it's called the African Principles. It says that we must reflect local realities like communal ownership, informal trade, and indigenous climate knowledge. We need to look at that so that we don't need to, when we're talking about climate change, how does a company report on embedding climate action into its operations? We need to look at also the indigenous climate knowledge, and that we need to honor local culture while also meeting global benchmarks. So it's about integrating traditional land stewardship, for example, or community benefit sharing models. So it's telling us that we need to look at our own context. But our own context does not say that a company should engage in corruption, should make corruption a strategy. That's it. A company, our own knowledge does not say that we should violate human rights. Our company does not say that we should not respect the issue of gender, for example, or sex torsion. All those things. Our culture does not allow that. So we have to understand that while we talk about local context, yes, in some areas, but not in everything. Our culture actually says that environment is very important to us. We treat our environment in a way that respect the environment. Biodiversity, for example, we just don't use our resources like that. We treat it, So that is it. So why we don't want to import everything, but what comes from abroad, doesn't mean that it's foreign to us. We are still part of the global village. Yeah.
So can ESG create? I'm more concerned about application of all this to the grassroots level, and that will be the next question that I want you to unpack. Now, can ESG create shared value for communities at the grassroots level, and if so, how?
Yes, indeed, it will. ESG is about, the S there includes how a company relates with the community.
Okay.
You cannot be a company and you are there, the people don't have water, and you are a company that makes we call it minerals in Nigeria. I don't want to mention somebody's company's name.
Exactly.
You are making, drinks, and you use a lot of water.
Drinks.
And your people, yes, and the people around you, in the community, they don't have water. They don't have so many things. So it's important, therefore, for you as a company, for you to be able to have a license to operate, you need to attend to the needs of the people in the community. And that's the S in environmental, social, and governance, in ESG. That is social, So ESG also must create jobs. It's not about companies just reporting and all that. They must create jobs. So what about the supply chain? You as a big company have the people in the community in your supply chain and help social enterprises. So, yes, and for example,
let's go to issue of governance and accountability, which is also important. I'm sure that you follow the UNGA proceedings. And one of the things I would have loved you to say or to share is the body language of African leaders at that meeting. Does it show any seriousness for ESG and all of that? But while you are answering that, what role do African governments and regional blocs like AU, AFDB play in enforcing and incentivizing ESG principles?
Yeah, it's a loaded question. With
I
regards
know.
to with regards to the UN General Assembly, of course, governments come here, I mean, to speak on issues that really matter to them. And
Yeah.
you hear them, everybody talking about different issues. For example, Nigeria talks about climate change, talks about the issue of ensuring that the Security Council should be expanded and all that. And so many other issues. You find people talking about the issues in Gaza, different issues. So that's all politics, And I believe yeah, yes, but of course they also talk about what they're doing on the ground, what countries are doing, in terms of the laws that they, the policies and all that regarding different issues, and especially the sustainable development goals, which aligns with the ESG. The ESG is targeted towards companies and investors. Sustainable development is targeted towards each one of us, and we must not leave anyone, poor, that we must not leave anyone behind. Yes,
The
indeed.
regional blocks. The
Yeah,
regional
now in
blocks.
terms of
What
role of
role?
governments and regional bodies, for example, the AU, the AFDB, and they can harmonize ESG policy and build reporting systems. And I've told you about the Africa peer review mechanism that
Okay.
that actually developed the African Code of Governance. They are doing that. They've done that. We have the AFCTFEA, so most of these
Okay.
African regional bodies, they're actually collaborating together. And of course, governments must act as enablers, not just regulators, because most of the time,
Okay.
government, because ESG is mostly, I would say, voluntary, I will quote,
You
but in
already
many
said that.
countries, like in Europe, they are now regulating, in terms of ESG. But then,
All right.
Let's, because of our time, I want your thought on this last question. How can transparency and data improve ESG outcomes, especially in Africa, public and private enterprises? And we know that data is a challenge here.
yes, indeed, data is really a challenge. And when you have ESG, reliable ESG data, data or data, some people call it data, some say data. Whenever you have reliable ESG data, it will drive credibility and investor confidence. So we need to have that. Digital tools, for example, AI, satellite imaging, blockchain, they can help to strengthen ESG tracking and anti-corruption frameworks. Also, publish dashboard and citizen reporting. They can make governance visible and participatory. And also, we have organized civil society organizations that will be tracking, the reliability of reports that companies are producing in terms of their ESG implementation.
All right. Thank you, Mrs. Olajobi Makinwa, a senior governance and former UN agency senior advisors, presently adjunct professor in one of the universities in the US. We want to commend the work you are doing, and we hope that you can contribute more to Africa and Nigerian development with regards to ESG. You have been able to help us to see the value in ESG, which is environment, social, and governance. We only hope that African leaders will be able to link it to their development goals and transform the environment. One of the challenges, or one of the things that we would like to speak to later, maybe in the second part in the near distance portion, is it shouldn't be a big company's affair. I think it should cascade back down to SMEs and startups so that we all embrace it. And we hope that it will become something that is mandatory, like in the Euro, instead of, because when something is voluntary, sometimes we know the approach of people to that. On that note, we want to say thank you. I thank you, our listeners, for this. And like we always said, please DM us or share with us your view about each of the episode, and we look forward to hearing from you. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, or you go to the podcast website www.difficultconversationafrica.org. See you in the next edition, and thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. For inquiry, please send an email to info@difficultconversationafrica.org. Telephone 0809 3160591. Please follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Difficult Conversation Africa. See you soon.